So, welcome back to Superliminal. And on today's episode, I have the fascinating Daniel Serghi. So, Daniel is a physicist, metaphysicist, and enterprise resource planning consultant, which is commercial enterprise level software. And I wanted to invite Daniel onto the show because we are part of a reality management group run by the incredible George Kavasilis, who's been on the podcast a couple of times. And I'm looking forward to having George on again in the near future. And I heard Daniel in conversation with George in one of the monthly meetings, and I was absolutely blown away by the nature of reality fundamentals that George was communicating. Daniel was able to infuse that with physics and metaphysics, and I love how he's got a foot in both worlds, in the seen and the unseen, in the physical world, in the physics world, and in the metaphysical, which is the unseen. And so this conversation is really Daniel and I just geeking out about the nature of reality. We didn't have an agenda. We didn't know where it was going to go. We're just simply talking about the nature of reality and how physics, quantum physics, and metaphysics all intertwine, and that there's no separation and only connection. So I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. And as always, please do like, comment, share, and subscribe, because it gets the podcast out to other wonderful people just like you who would benefit from it. But for now, enjoy the conversation, and I'll see you in a second. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Superliminal Podcast. And as you'll have heard from the previous short intro video, today I have a really, really fascinating guest, Daniel Serghi. So Daniel is a physicist, a metaphysicist, and an enterprise resource planning consultant, which is enterprise level software. But the reason I wanted to invite Daniel on the show is because he has such a beautiful balance of a foot in the physics camp, but also equally as strongly a foot in the metaphysics camp as well. Because for the regular listeners and for anyone who's new, we understand that everything is interconnected. There's no separation. You know, there was a time in millennia gone by where science was integrated with spirituality, religion, and everything else. But over the centuries, it's been divided and subdivided again. And I think that's been intentional for reasons we may discuss. But for now, Daniel, thanks ever so much for coming on to Superliminal, and it's really, really great to have you here.
Hello, it's fascinating the topic is fascinating. I'm very much honored by your invitation. Let's drop to it, okay? So about me, I used to say that I'm a physicist by education and a metaphysicist by necessity. And this is because I believe that in true conscious, you cannot be a physicist without being a metaphysicist. And what you say, it's very true. Those parts of reality have been split. Somebody used to say that they throw everything that they don't know in material domain, they throw it to science, and everything that they couldn't solve in the spiritual domain, they turn it to religion. So even today, if you look at both of those areas, they have their own contributions and their own dysfunctionalities, so to say, okay? But let's come back to this. We follow something that fascinated me since I became a physicist, because when I entered the faculty, in the college, I was extremely excited, believing that physics is what we know. And then I became absolutely fascinated when I realized that physics is what we do not know. And the quest for why I cannot say that it's been all consuming because I'm not consumed, but it's been a thrill, right? And there are famous physicists, not that I'm comparing with them, that let's say contributed my spirit of excitement. And I can name you a physicist, which is Richard P. Feynman, and I can name you um, a biologist, which is Rupert Sheldrake, that will contribute to this union of, and they're both guys, spirits. I mean, when Richard P. Feynman has been asked if he believes in God, he said that he doesn't have enough data to disprove it. So that was a very elegant way to, there have been physicists, all the big physicists that I am able to remember, contributors to quantum mechanics, let's say to the progress of physics in the last century, ended up by being believers. I cannot say religious. Some of them, they became religious believers, right? Because it's impossible to look at the reality that you can feel through your senses, maybe mediated by devices, but that's still through your senses, right? It's impossible to look at it and not realize that there is a plane behind it that even that you cannot measure, even if you cannot touch it, feel it, smell it, whatever. It is that plane of existence that determines the material. It's not the other way around.
Absolutely. And it's always made me, yeah, I've always been really, really fascinated by that because at best, for anybody to put it into perspective, what Daniel's saying, at best, with our physical senses, we see 0.003, or is it even three zeros? But it's a tiny, tiny fraction of less than 1% of the known energy spectrum, which for me is absolutely insane. And it made me I love that we've got started on a nice easy subject like the nature of reality, Daniel, but it made me curious as to what brought you into this realm from the earliest age. Tell us your backstory and what brought you into the world of physics and metaphysics.
It's pretty, yeah, it's funny looking in reverse, right? So I've been born in Romania, in a communist country, and communism is in itself a religion. That is an anti-religion, right? But it's many of those things are very common. And so it was purely materialistic, right? And then I went to study physics, that is the most materialistic of the nature sciences that you can study, right? Um, Interestingly enough, we had very good teachers of math because you cannot do physics without math, even if I'm not a mathematician. And we've got very good teachers in philosophy because they realized that a physicist is a kind of an animal very difficult to fool because they will be asking why. Why is our question of the default question? Like an engineer has the default question, how? A physicist has the question as the default question, why? And then I began to look at reality. What you are taught is that systems evolve thermodynamically towards disorder. And when you look outside, that you cannot deny, is a world of order. How a cardinal becomes the pennage is red. What is the bewildering variety of plants and everything? How crystals come into being? What is the relation between minerals and plants and animals? How do the things morph one into another? This defies an explanation based on statistics. Otherwise put, the materialist physics says that we are a clock, that we are a mechanical device that goes according to some precise rules. You look at reality and you see that those rules are permanently invalidated by another higher order of complexity. And then you say something is not jiving here, right? And then you come back to basics, and the basics are like this. When when anybody starts studying physics, they say, okay, guys, reality is too complex. In order to study it, we are going to simplify it a little bit. And we are going to simplify it a little bit by introducing the notion of a system. What is a system by definition? Is a part of reality mentally separated from the rest of the universe. So we call the part that we mentally separate as the system. We consider the rest of the universe as the rest of the universe, and now we begin to look at the relations between the system, but the parts of the system, and we try to find out something about the relations between the system and the rest of the universe. But you see, even physics does not recognize the notion of separation. It's only a conceptual separation. It's a trick. It's a make-believe. Oh, and because I uttered this word, let me tell you a secret, right? Even what we believe that are laws are based on beliefs. Well, ultimately, there are many things in science that are beliefs. Even if we don't pretend fronting civilians, we don't say that. But we believe that the speed of light is a constant. We do not know it for a fact. We do not know it. We believe that there has been a Big Bang. There are facts, James Webb Telescope, that almost nullify the hypothesis of the Big Bang. But let's say that we believe that it was a Big Bang. Even if we admit that the Big Bang existed 13.7 billion years ago, we do not know that the speed of light at the moment of Big Bang was the same as today. We believe that it's so. So there are fundamental, we base our physical construct on some axioms, but the axioms are beliefs. Even in math, right? I mean, you construct a geometry based on Euclidean axioms, and then you go to Riemann and you construct a different geometry, out of which the Euclidean geometry is a particular set. It's more general. Well, how many more general theories can we make? It's like we were talking the other day when I told you that truth is like an onion. You can peel it and peel it and peel it, and there is always a deeper level, right? So anyway, coming to this fascinating subject of nature of reality, I realized in how many ways you can oppose reality, right? So we are talking reality versus illusion. That's a possibility, a possible avenue of exploration. What is real? What is an illusion? Well, we can say we can oppose reality with imaginary. But imaginary can be real. So those terms, that we have to pay attention to terms that we are using, right? And then something in fashion today, it's a reality versus simulation. Is a simulation real? Well, there are aspects within a simulation, certain things are real. For that simulation only, I don't know how to say, right? So in a game, the rules of the game define a reality that is valid only within that game. Footnote, this is why we humans can be so easily fooled, right? Because somebody puts out a construct in front of us They make us forget the rest of the universe. And now they say, okay, this is your reality. Those are your rules. This is how things work. You should do this. You should do that.
And we see that played out everywhere in the world, but particularly in the world of science, which becomes a dogmatic religion which goes against everything that its foundational fundament should be, which is exploration, questioning, pushing the boundaries, continually exploring new ideas, new possibilities, new hypotheses. But it's become the other way around. And particularly in this day and age, Daniel, that we live in, where it is so easy to mind control people with, where is it? With these things, with
Beautiful.
with laptops, with TV, with so-called social media. The reality becomes exactly as you've said. It's whatever people are programmed with. And people are also programmed to forget that actually they're infinite creator beings having a brief human experience. And as a result of that, then the control agenda gets ever tighter and ever more and the human awareness and the human reality becomes not only more constrained, but is then programmable by the so-called authorities, the elite, the cabal, or whatever you want to call them.
It's a constant opposition between control and the increased awareness. Increased awareness is a natural law. I would consider it a basic rule of the universe, right? Increase in awareness. Increase in awareness means enrich the exploration, enrich the perception of that exploration, getting the conclusions, and then explore even more. So it's a continuous expansion. Otherwise put, I would say God is expanding. The creator is expanding, regardless of how we define the things. And regardless of the, let's say, particular religious incidence angle, some people coming from, I don't know, all sorts of religions, as soon as you reckon that there is an entity that influences some other entities, then the whole system is evolving. That this is the only thing that I would say, this is the only certitude that I have. Because I know that today I know a little bit more than yesterday. And then obviously when I'm looking, and I'm looking at my parents, I'm looking at my school, I'm looking at everything. It's this constant opposition. Some people want to control me, want to tell me what to do or not to do. No, that's okay, because for social coexistence, we need to have some common rules. No, they want to tell me how should I think. And here we have a problem. Because they want to tell me, no, this is the correct thinking. This is what you should think. While we don't see that everything is just a strung on a ladder, even if today we are thinking something. Tomorrow we will see something more. What's the essence? Okay, so the essence of evolution in physics is pretty simple. You do something, you construct a model, and then you compare the model with whatever you consider that it's reality. And there will always be a delta. You become fascinated about that delta. You know, Newton had his mechanics, and his mechanics was fine. And based on Newtonian mechanics, we are able to send Voyager 1 and 2 beyond the confines of the solar system. So that works. But then when you look that the light is bent close to a star, you have to go into relativist mechanic. That doesn't nullify Newtonian mechanics. Einstein couldn't have existed without Newton. It's not a who's right, who's wrong. Because it's like an icebreaker. We break some ice up to a point, and then somebody comes and breaks the next patch of ice. And this is how we progress. If we admit progress, then we have to consider that everything that hampers progress is unnatural. And here we come into contradiction with how we give money to the research today. What we consider that we should and we shouldn't do in academia. I can talk as I can talk now because my existence, my physical existence, depends on enterprise resource planning and not on academia. If I would be on academia, I would be condemned to study one subject or another.
I absolutely can relate to that. A good friend of mine went to university about 3 years ago to study biomedical, something like that. I should remember. But anyway, she got to university, and one of the first assignments she was given, she was told that her responses had to fit in within certain parameters. And she was astounded at that because her response was, surely to goodness, my responses should be whatever the evidence and whatever the experiment tells me. And then with my level of awareness at this point in time, I then create my conclusions. But she was basically told that she would have to create her report so it fitted the already known narrative, which, I mean, this stuff goes on, but when you hear it firsthand like that, it's astounding. Needless to say, she didn't stay very long because she realized that I do not want to be a part of this ridiculous control system that is doing the opposite of what fundamentally science should be all about.
There is a guy called Luc Montagnier. Well, he died a few years back. Nobel Prize awarded. This is the guy that discovered HIV/AIDS. Okay, so let's put it in perspective. There is a guy called Luc Montagnier. He was a biologist, doctor, whatever, French, and he realized that HIV is what it is. Okay, fine. Nobel Prize. Then, years later, he made an experiment along those lines. Okay, you can Google it and you can find more. Okay, so he took plasma from an HIV patient, put it in a sort of a resonance system with some electronics, together with some water. And that water got the HIV signature. He said, no, this cannot be. So he took that signal, recorded it on a memory stick, and sent it to a friend of his that was somewhere in Napoli or whatever in Italy. That guy took the signal, put the signal on a coil, imprinted that signal on a jar of water, and that jar of water gave an HIV signal. Fascinating, right? So the water is programmable. This is one fact that we have it from the lords, right? Nordics that they put their knowledge into water. And it was a question in my mind, how can water do this? If you allow this branch, and then I'll come to Luc Montagnier, the molecule of water that all of us in school have this stupid mental model of molecules as little balls that jump. The water molecule with an H and two O's, two H's and an O, has a form that makes it that molecules of water are never alone. Always, physically, water is always in an aggregate of some form. And this is why you have snowflakes, and this is why there are not two snowflakes that are alike. So when you have a structure, you can program that structure. Interesting, right? So it's nothing, in the end, it's nothing surprising. However, when Montaigne came with this thing, they said, no, poor old guy, he's become cuckoo, right? It's Alzheimer. It must be something else. They cut all his funding. He ended up by being a pariah just because he went outside of what science considered that academia, not science, considered that he should study. A beautiful contribution to physics, because in physics you try to do models, and you know that you are making models, so you don't fool yourself. You know that what you're doing is just a model. And many people try to have this explanation of how elementary particles come into being and all that. Okay. There is a guy called Lisi, Anthony Garrett Lisi. He's a theoretical physicist, has no academia position, and he's doing surfing in Hawaii because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to come up with his idea. He came with a very funny mental construct. I have to explain you what projection is, right? So you have a ball, and if you put a light on it, the projection on a wall is a circle, right? So it's like when we do like this and they look like rabbits and whatnot, right? So the projection of this 3D object on a 2D plane is a circle. But if you take a circle and you try to project it, it becomes a line, right? Correct? If you put it on another plane. So if you take the circle now and fine. So this guy invented a mathematical object in a very complex symmetry of 48 dimensions or whatever, that by projecting on different planes, those projections would act like elementary particles. And he's been able to do some predictions. So because it's not the fundamental model that is recognized in elementary particles, this guy doesn't have a funding. Does it mean that he's an idiot? No, it doesn't mean. Right? On the other hand, you have Rupert Sheldrake. And I mean, to me, it's right because he says, fine. And this is a very interesting problem in biology. Why? What makes the liver end and the gallbladder begin? Because cells have the same DNA and they come from a union of two cells. They come from a single egg. When that egg is multiplying, various areas get different functions. What gives the information about function? He came with this idea of morphogenetic fields. It makes sense. I don't say that it's exact. I don't say that it's final. But this is how we stifle research. We say, oh, this is not entirely true. I mean, criticizing on the same side of the barricade, as I put it, is okay. Criticizing from the opposite part of the barricade doesn't impress me a lot because anybody's able to criticize. So this is about the nature of reality, okay? Let me bring another thing, reality versus imaginary. Is imaginary and real versus belief. I'm jumping around. This is an idea that is absolutely fabulous. I've got it from, I'm quoting a famous Romanian sociologist, very important, okay? He's been asked if beliefs are real. And he said, beliefs become real. Human beliefs become reality by their consequences. It's a little bit deep here, right? If I believe that helping someone in need is right, this is what I believe. It's neither real nor real. But I am helping somebody in need. That is a real thing. So whatever the belief was something that it's untouchable, right? It's metaphysics, if you want. But its consequence is physical. I did something. I moved an object believing that this is better. I brushed my teeth. This is physical, based on the belief that brushing teeth is good. And this takes me to another problem. Morals are belief, right? To me, as a physicist, this was one of the moments where I had to shift to become even more of a believer, right? To me, the fact that moral exists is a demonstration of God's existence. Again, regardless how you define God and what you mean by God. Why? Because in a physical system, there are no moral demands. You see, there might be something may be hot, may be cold. If you take some water and you cool it, it becomes ice. So you can make all sorts of changes in the so-called physical reality. But in this physical reality in which we move, we get born, we live, and we die, there are moral constraints. Those moral constraints come from where? They are not imposed by the physical reality, right? If I eat an egg or a carrot or whatever, that's neither moral nor immoral. So how do we explain where does the moral come from? It's not from reality, but it's real. So then what is real, what is not real, right? So I talked about reality and simulation, right? And I said that what's in a simulation is, for all intents and purposes, real for the participants in that simulation. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's true, right? We talked about reality versus illusion. It's very hard to... Yes, so obviously illusion is not reality. But illusion is constructed, not so? Nothing is an illusion because it's been an illusion. Somebody created an illusion, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it begs the question, Daniel, is the definition of reality.
And here we have to because all my discourse so far was about the movable definition of reality, right? So here we have to return to George Kavasilas, right? Because he puts this definition of reality on a ground that is, I won't say that it's impossible to nullify, but what I want to say is that this is the strongest definition that I met so far. So he defines reality as the experience of intention. And if we dig into it a little bit, right? So we have what? We have intention, which presupposes that reality is a construct based on an intention. It must be without an intention, there is nothing that exists in general. Therefore, in particular, there is no reality.
Yeah.
Fine. So now you have an intent. That intent has some consequences. See the thing that even if it was just an intent, it became real based on its consequences. But the consequences are what you experience. So coming back to the definition, if you consider that the reality is the experience of intention, then you consider your intentions or intentions of anybody's for that matter. And then you look at the consequences, at the experience, at what you experience. And this is super. This is everything that he said. I only add one thing. Some intentions are common. We all intend, let's say, in our field of intentions has been created a city, and in those cities are buses and streets and whatever. So part of that intention becomes common, it's collective. The collective intention we experience all in a collective way. We generally don't argue whether that bus is 37 or is not 37. It's either 37 or it's 42, whatever stops at that stop, right? But whether a sandwich is good or bad, that's something that we have different opinions, right? So my intention of a pizza with pineapple was hoping that it's good, and it's not. I don't want to go into trivial, right? But this has something with let me go quickly to quantum mechanics, right? Because what is a pizza without quantum mechanics? 1923, I believe, Solvay in Brussels, in Belgium. A meeting of all the luminaries of quantum mechanics. Everybody was there. Old and new. Langevin to Dirac. Everybody was there. And they were arguing on how to interpret quantum mechanics and whatnot. There were basically two interpretations. I'm not going to go too deep into quantum mechanics now, but both of those interpretations, while opposite in some of the nature, sorry, this is my Mac, okay, they agreed on the fact that the experimenter is part of the experiment. That's another way to say that consciousness is part of everything that happens. And here we can have different ideas about what the collapse of a wave function means. But we might still convene on some common beliefs that create a model that maybe we can expand. There is a duality between particle and wave, right? Well known, Dirac. They say that, okay, so in certain experiments, an electron behaves like a particle, and in certain experiments, it behaves like a wave. Well, the wave, if the reality of the electron is a single one, it's a reality, then its temporal aspect may be the wave, and its spatial aspect may be a particle. Because a particle has a place in space, and the wave exists in time. How this come together in the reality of an electron, we are still debating. but we cannot debate its reality, right? So here again, we have to convene, we have to, it's not that we must convene. I think that we better share our viewpoints so that we can progress. We progress both individually and as a collective, right?
Where so what you've just described there, Daniel, is that where the observer effect became known?
Yes, but the observer, who is the observer? It's his consciousness.
Yeah.
Let me introduce here, because only English, and I investigated how many languages in the world make the distinction between consciousness and awareness. Because other than English, none of the European languages does. Sanskrit makes the difference between consciousness and awareness. Even German, I was absolutely shocked, because German is a very well-defined, well-structured language. They don't have a difference between consciousness and awareness. The French, you see,
And
so
yeah. And how would you define the difference then?
in a non-English language, you would say that the consciousness of oneself is aware of the consciousness of something is awareness, but that is just right. So what I'm saying is that the awareness, in my opinion, it's not the consciousness of the observer, it's the awareness of the observer that participates in the outcome of the fact. Because an experiment is just a fact, right? Under controlled circumstances, but it's still a fact. So, and this comes to what we were saying, only that with deeper consequences. Remember the system. We are studying the system and its interaction with the rest of the universe. But if the awareness that is not part of the physical reality has something to do, influences, it's modifies the consequences of that experiment, then awareness is part of the system. Then metaphysics is part of physics. They are joined. You cannot understand one through another. What I want to say is that metaphysics doesn't nullify physics. And conversely, physics doesn't nullify metaphysics. Well, everybody, the effort of the materialistic science is to split mechanics from spirituality. And spirituality, what spirituality does, what spirituality does is that they begin to use terms like quantum and holographic without knowing what they mean. And they are superb things. Those things, quantum, entanglement, holographic, they are absolute beautiful physical realities that have metaphysical interpretations. But that doesn't mean that quantum healing means something to me, unless you define it. If you tell me that by the energetic healing that you do, whether it's pranic healing, Reiki, I don't like Reiki, but that's a different question, okay? Nobody can negate, right? There are modalities of healing, at least for close to equilibrium situations, that work. So if that exists, then the power of intent changes an outcome. Beautiful. How it changes the outcome? Well, one very natural interpretation would be that, so what is quantum? Quantum is, the shock of quantum physics was to tell us that nothing is true. Everything is probabilities. It's a field of truth with various probabilities. And this goes against our innate desire to have a correct answer once and for all. Well, there is nothing. Like Feynman was saying, if this is what you want, too bad. I cannot give that to you. Because the reality behaves how it behaves, right? So now I have also like a dice that can fall with 1/6 probability on each side. If I'm doing pranic healing or whatever I'm doing, energetic healing, it's like putting some metal, tampering with that dice so that it's more likely that it will fall with the 6 on top. And then you are healed. So the intention of the healer or whomever, as well as, I don't know, I believe that there are higher energies that go into this healing. It's not just my intent. It's not only my intent and my power, because I am an element in a field of powers. So probably if you want, I'm curving I'm like the magnet that takes some field, some magnetic field, and concentrates it in the magnet. Right? So, and I'm using that concentration to tamper with how the dice will fall so that I perform some healing. Sometimes it works, many times. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes has physical consequences. I have seen cross ligaments in the knee healed with energy. I've seen it. I mean, it's X-ray. You cannot deny it. It's objective reality, whatever you mean by objective. Right? So this is quantum. It's not quantum. It's that the intent modifies quantum. Holography, a hologram, is something that fascinates me because it takes me to a hologram happens only when light is coherent, meaning that all those light waves are in phase. So it's that coherence, and I let everybody understand whatever they want through coherence, because whatever they understand is valid. It's the coherence of the light that makes the information of everything being reflected into everything. Right? So technically the hologram was that you take an image in a laser light that is coherent, and you put it on a plate, on a physical plate with gelatin and silver and whatnot, right? And you take the image of an object. And then if you break that plate, and if you go to a bit of a plate and you illuminate it with the same light that you used to take the picture, you will retrieve the same image with less intensity because it's less light here than it was on the bigger plate. But you have the whole information. So the idea is that in a normal light, you would have that lens here. And if you have a candle, the image of the top of the candle will be here, and the image of the bottom of the candle will be here on the plate. If you do the same thing in coherent light, each small part of the plate will have the information about both sides of the candle, both the top and the bottom. And this is fascinating because this shows you that in coherence, information propagates universally. And this is possibly one of the mechanics for which we can go into telepathic communication, or I get to know what you know without talking. Maybe we resonate into some kind of wave I wouldn't be able to tell you if it's just pure electromagnetic wave or whatever it is, because I don't, as you were saying, we only know a very small portion of reality. But maybe in those fields, we resonate, and this is how we know. We know the same thing about the same candle.
Because it's interesting because often when, certainly in my life, this has happened so often that when I become close to someone on an emotional basis, and it's usually with a romantic partner, um, then what I find is that that effect seems to be brought to bear every single time, where you become the telepathic element of it um, really becomes true because I think everybody can relate to it when you're really close to someone emotionally, is that you think of a thing to tell that person and they'll text you about it, and it's not something, and a lot of the time it's not something that's predictable or obvious, or there's a, like, you go to, I was like, oh, I must call that person about something or other, and your phone rings and it's them and they say, oh, I just wanted to give you a quick call about the same thing. And it fascinates me how that
It's a resonance. It's
how that
this. It's a
happens,
resonance.
because it is because of that coherence between
Exactly.
our light waves, between you and that other point of awareness.
That happens in a medium or in a field that we do not know or we don't recognize it within the frames of materialistic physics today. But the phenomenon, the resonance phenomenon, I would say I am almost obliged to reckon with it, because otherwise I cannot explain what you just described. We must be together on some plane of reality, vibrating together, not like this, but like this. And if we do this, then what happens here? You see, if they are connected, if they are resonant, if they are in phase, as we say about vibration, then obviously there is some communication from this part to this part, even if there is no material. It doesn't need to be a chain to do like this. It can be whatever this ineffable field. In physics, there is, you know, that it was that ether as a medium. So among the many theories of light, right, they said, fine, if light is a vibration, that something must vibrate. And because they couldn't find anything, they said, okay, so that ether doesn't exist. There is a coming back of that notion of ether as a medium or as a field, if you want, that can vibrate, or on which you can imprint vibrations. Because again, I don't know how many people know this. In around 19, so the electromagnetism, Maxwell's equations, whatever, were formulated in 1899 on the cusp of the century. And because they knew mostly everything about, they were having all those thermic machines and trains and steam locomotives and everything. And they knew a little bit of the theory of that. Somebody, I don't know whose name, a physicist anyway, he said that, okay, now we know everything, and it's only details that remain to be figured out. And those details have been quantum mechanics, theory of relativity. So it's beyond funny. It's absolutely beyond funny. I mean, it's
Yeah,
unbelievable. Right?
that is hilarious. And oh, a point I wanted to go back to as well, Daniel, that you mentioned earlier about um, consciousness and observation, and quantum being infinite possibility, is that it brings us back to, and I mean, people will have heard this non-stop about the fact that we are creator beings, but I think it's very difficult for people to really understand what that means. But simply put, it's basically, although there's a time lag down here in this frequency, is that basically if we have a strong desire and intention to bring something into being, and it comes with a strong emotion of a positive emotion of appreciation, joy, happiness, love, gratitude, whatever it might be, before we see the thing physically with our eyes, then it seems that actually we're then working with the quantum field, with that desire and intention to bring it into being. And I've experienced that in my life a lot. And sometimes the time frames have been shocking because one thing that I think is always missing from that part of the conversation is that it's often said that seeing is believing, but this is BS. It's the other way around, and it's not even believing. I take it one step further. It's knowing. So knowing is seeing, because what we see with our physical senses, but with our eyes in particular, is a record of the past, of every decision that we've ever made. And it's the residual effect of all those decisions that we see in the now. So what happens is people then decide that they want to create something, but then because they don't see it with their eyes, they think, oh, well, it's not happening, or it's too hard, or it's miles away. But actually nothing could be further from the truth. Is that right?
I believe, yes, I believe it's right. I believe that no other explanation stands because when we are talking about having something in mind and then something becoming out of it, right? I used to give example. I gave this example to my kids. Listen, my preferred object is a pencil. In order to make a pencil, somebody has to think about making a pencil. If nobody in the world would think about a pencil, there will be no pencil. We agree, right? Then somebody has to bring together some of those things. They have to make an effort to bring some wood and some, put together those things. And he must make the effort, because if the whole mankind is thinking about a pencil, but nobody is bringing things together, nobody decides, nobody wants to do it, there will be no pencil. So now it has to be the will. And this is the emotion, is the thing that brings things together. And finally, you need some wood and some graphite, because if you don't have the matter, you won't have a pencil. Right? So now you have a trinity here. Right? You have a concept, and obviously, and some people talk about insouling a thought. That comes to putting the emotion is what burns, right? So regardless of how much you believe into energy harvesting by alien beings or whatever other types of entities, which I believe that it happens to be true. Why? Because it explains some of the things. So that harvesting is harvesting of emotion. Nobody is interested in harvesting my mind. They are interested in harvesting my emotion, whether it's for an election process or for going to war or for doing whatever, or to help a person in need. Right? All those things, they are realized with emotions. Otherwise, I can think until cows come home and nothing will happen. So yes, indeed. And how this comes into reality, it comes into what somebody that I love very much says, listen, Planck's constant marks the border between uncreated and created. But that is the cusp where quantum mechanics exists at Planck level, okay? Google Planck length, Planck time, whatever. Now, at that moment, when those particles come together, it's the intent that blows that particle in a way or in another way. And this is, we come to the dice, and we come to influencing what the material existence becomes by our mind. And everybody talks about egregores, thought forms, and the only obvious, and they are factual, right? Again, even if they become real through their consequences. I don't care how voodoo happens, but if a person has accident following some voodoo spell, there is a causal relation. And when it becomes, let's say, statistically significant, this is how we do science. Materialistic science is statistically significant. We take drugs because they have made statistically significant. They believe that it's statistically significant that if you take an Advil, in most of the people, taking an Advil would make their headache disappear for a little while. So there is a statistical correlation. Does it mean that for everybody the same? No. But statistically, it's okay. So actually, with this, I will stop for a little bit. This is how I convinced myself that energetic healing exists. Because in physics, we reckon that something is real by doing what is called the interlaboratory check. I do something in Anvers, and I put something, I don't know, I put some water to boil, right? And I measure it and I say, okay, it boils, and on my measure, it has this much, this is the temperature. And then I send it to somebody in Sydney. And if they boil a beaker of water and the temperature is within reasonable differences about the same, then we convene that the water boils at 100 Celsius, 212 Fahrenheit. It will always be a small difference between, in Anvers, the air pressure may be different than the one in Sydney. You can make it here in the summer, there in the winter. But reasonably, we are looking at the same thing, and we convene that we are looking at the same thing. So if we are looking that we believe something and that thing happens, with a statistical correlation, we cannot deny it, just because we cannot touch it or see it.
That's right. That's right, Daniel. Because again, we keep circling back to that same thing, is that effectively from the physical, from this physical perspective, we're blind, literally blind. 0.003 of the known energy spectrum is what we pick up at best with our physical senses. And that's just the known energy spectrum. So it therefore stands to, I mean, you can prove this for real, where, you can, I've had this conversation so many times with people where they've said, that's ridiculous. How can that be true? And I'm like, okay, right now, in this moment, there are at least 30 songs playing. Can you hear any of them? No. If I gave you a receiver with a speaker attached to it and you were able to tune in, would you then be able to hear the music? Oh, yeah. So just because you can't see a thing doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You know that there are radio waves being broadcasted from radio stations, whether it's satellite or old-fashioned masts or whatever, and all you need to do is to be able to tune into it. And I often share that metaphor because it then helps people to begin to understand that actually, when it comes to creation, creating the reality that you want, creating the environment that you want, creating the outcomes that you want, to actually try and do that from a physical point of view is such hard work. You are starting at the end of the process instead of starting at the beginning of the process, which is desire, heartfelt, genuine desire.
Maybe trying to come here to landing for this moment, for this leg, I would bold and underline what you say. I will just rephrase this. We are saying exactly the same thing. The fact that, I'll take this example just because I gave it before, morals and moral concepts, on one hand, they exist, and on the other hand, they influence reality, right? Whether people are moral or immoral, first of all, we have this ability to classify, and then they have some consequences. That implies that reality is created. Nothing is that random. So that means that before anything, it's been an idea and it's been an energy to install it. But if this doesn't demonstrate that there must be a creator for everything, I'm not saying that it's single. I am a creator, you are a creator. We are part of creation, right? But what I'm saying is that you cannot say that universe is just a machine that has its mechanics and I am just an accident in this universe, which what materialistic science is trying to say, right? So, yeah.
And of course, nothing could be further from the truth, given that there is so much scientific evidence to prove past lives. Well, they're all obviously happening in the infinite present moment, and that we have reincarnated many, 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 many times, and not just on this planet, not just as humans. I mean, we could go on and on and on and on, but I think the most important thing is that we have to realize that there is so much more than what we see with our eyes. And I know we've already said it so many times, but if there's anything I want people to take away from this conversation, it's to just stop and think about what we've said about how blind we are, but simultaneously, because we are creator beings, how we are actually connected here from our heart soul essence, as George Kavassilis says,
Yes.
which I love that expression. We're connected. This is the physical body is the is the interface with everything that is via where our soul resides here in the heart soul essence. And all you need to do is start meditating, and you'll begin to feel the truth of that. So yeah, we could go on and on, but I think we're already at an hour, and I feel like we've barely had the starter, Daniel.
Yeah.
So for now, I think that's probably
Let me give a closing thought that is
yeah.
interesting. Um, I'm going to quote. So if I consider that something is counterproductive, is the desire for certitudes. There are no certitudes. Just embrace this thing, okay? Feynman was saying, I don't have a problem that I don't know precisely. Okay, he was a Nobel Prize physicist. He must have known what. But just to, in a humorous note, I will end up with the fabulous quote of the inventor of materialism, if you want, of rationalism, as opposed to spirit. René Descartes, right? It's the Cartesius, is the famous thing. I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I exist. So it's amazing how even the guy that negated, strive to negate the spirit, was based on made his declaration based on spirit. So it's wonderful. Yeah.
That is so true. So, Daniel, I love to end these conversations with three quick fire questions. So,
Okay.
the first one is, what are you most excited about right now?
To understand time, because I don't understand it, and infinity, the spiritual mathematics of infinity excite me at this moment. How does it come that I am an infinite being? I believe extremely strongly that I am an infinite being. I don't know yet how to come to terms with it.
That is something that plays in my heart and soul again, and has done since I was a little kid. So I do really, really resonate with that. I love that. So the second one is, imagine that you just jumped into a time machine, the doors close, you can hear yourself moving
Yes,
through time. The doors open, and then there's 12-year-old Daniel stood in front of you. What one piece of information, advice rather, would you give that young boy?
probably believe in yourself.
Yeah, beautiful.
I've never been. Again, this is a control factor that I've never been educating because it's different than believe your ego. It's believe in yourself. Yeah,
Your true self. Yeah,
yeah,
beautiful.
your true
And
self.
then finally, Daniel, what's the number one thing that's wrong in the world right now? And what one thing would you do to solve it?
Separation, the forced separation, the education of separation, and I would only ask people to stop a little bit and look around and realize that every cell in me, even if me, I am not my cells, all my mechanics reside on objects from the earth. I am one with the earth. All this gives me energy, comes from the sun. I am part of the sun. There are no systems. Systems are just mental constructs. Get rid of mental constructs. Look around. Look around. As Sun Tzu was saying, when you look at the other army and you see that even if it's well prepared, it doesn't engage, you have to consider the situation deeply. Well, you have to look at the reality and consider it deeply, and then all this separation begins to disappear. We become a little bit more permeable to one to another.
Yeah.
But it's an individual thing. We cannot rely on anybody's effort. We have to stop ourselves and look around.
And feel it.
That's
Yeah.
only a recommendation, cannot impose.
Yeah. I love that. And I cannot agree more.
Yeah.
So, for everybody watching, thanks ever so much for tuning in. I mean, this was just a really beautiful, self-indulgent conversation between Daniel and I to geek out on the nature of reality, physics, and metaphysics. So, if you're still watching, thanks ever so much for tuning in. As always, please do like, comment, and share. It helps the algorithm get the podcast to other wonderful people just like you who could benefit from it. And we'll see you next time. And also, Daniel, thanks ever so much for this fabulous conversation. And I'm really
Thank you
looking
very much.
forward.
I'll be looking forward to the commentaries to your podcast because I'm very interested to see reality with others' eyes.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and I'm very much looking forward to another conversation in the future because yeah, we've barely got started. But for now, thanks again, everyone, and I will see you on the next podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.